According to the Korean National Police Agency, around 300,000 to 450,000 total crime cases occur in South Korea on a yearly basis. But if you're a South Korean or pay much attention to the South Korean news, you'll know that there is currently a specific crime case that has been all over the news over the past month or so and has subsequently infuriated many South Koreans. And this crime case is the Busan Roundhouse Kick as assault attempted murder case. Let us briefly go over what happened. On May 22nd, 2022, the victim just finished watching a street performance with her friends and was returning back home. It was on a Saturday night when she went out, so she was returning home pretty late. By the way, this all happened in the city of Busan, which is the second largest city of South Korea in terms of population. And as the real name and identity of the victim is rightfully protected under the South Korean law, let us call the victim Miss Kim for now. At around 5 a.m., Miss Kim enters back into her apartment building, presses the button for the elevator to come down, and was waiting on the first floor. Then only a few seconds later, a man furtively walks behind her and does a roundhouse kick to the back of her head. Then Miss Kim collapses hard after the kick and smashes her head against the wall, while the offender continues to assault her, specifically targeting her head area to make sure that she passes out. Now, just this act in and of itself, where a large man kicks a random woman that he saw on the street for the first time in the head, then continues to assault her for apparently no reason at all, is enough to make any individual very angry. And in South Korea, as I've briefly mentioned in our previous video on South Korea's army of millions of online misogynists, the link to the video is on the top right hand side right now for those who want to watch it. So this type of don't ask me the reason, or 묻지마 in Korean, types of crimes have been occurring more and more frequently in South Korea, especially against women. But then this roundhouse kick case was not the only 묻지마 crime that has happened in South Korea over the past few months. So then what are the exact elements about this specific case that is causing so much public uproar in South Korea and have the Korean media and the people focus on it so extensively? Let us first get into how this roundhouse kick case was first brought to the public light. The unfortunate reality of the matter is that during the early phases of the investigation leading up to the first trial, this roundhouse kick crime case was completely uncovered by the news media in South Korea, which thus meant that the Korean public was quite oblivious to the crime case. However, things changed on November 5th, 2022, when the victim, Miss Kim, uploaded a long community post in one of South Korea's online platform community sites by the name of Nate Pan. The uploaded post soon went viral, which then subsequently led to various news media sources of South Korea contacting the victim for interviews and further news coverage, which naturally led to the case to be widely publicized and thus gained the attention of the South Korean people. And as the case became more widely covered, more and more information was revealed about the offender, which included the actual name of the offender that was previously protected under the South Korean law. The face and identity reveal was conducted by a South Korean influencer, and this influencer now faces a potential lawsuit against him for defamation. But through the act of this brave influencer, we now know that the name of the offender is Lee, who is a Busan native. It also turned out that Lee already had a record of 18 criminal convictions, and out of his past criminal convictions were already cases such as assault. And according to the words of a former classmate of Lee, he conducted assault in the past using a very similar method to the one of this case. According to his former classmate, Lee had a criminal history where he was hiding up in the mountains, then went behind the woman who was walking up to the mountains and kicked her from behind on her legs to make her fall, then subsequently assaulted her. Again, the whole kicking from behind and first making the woman helpless, then going on to commit his evil acts is just almost analogous to this roundhouse kick crime. Now, to this day, Lee continues to adamantly claim that although he did kick the woman in the head, which he obviously cannot lie and refute as there is a literal CCTV footage of him conducting a roundhouse kick on Miss Kim with all the force that he could mutter from his fat and despicable body, he did not commit any kind of assault on her. And the reason why he can continue to claim this with a straight face is due to the fact that right after he kicked and attacked the victim in the head multiple times and made her unconscious, he picks her up from the ground and deliberately carries her and her belongings to a place in the building where there is no CCTV. And after he has carried Miss Kim to an area of the building where there is no CCTV installation, he does not leave the building right away. He stays in the building with the unconscious Miss Kim for additional 7 to 8 minutes, then subsequently leaves the building, looking seemingly as if he's zipping his pants back up. Now, the initial DNA swab test conducted on Miss Kim by the South Korean police was rather perfunctory at best. They did a swab test on areas of her clothing, such as the left knee area of her jeans, the right knee area of her jeans, the rear end area of her jeans, the backside of the shirt in which she was wearing, as well as a cardigan. But now it is quite pointless to do swab tests on the outer parts of her clothing in which the victim was wearing on the day, as the offender Lee did physically pick Miss Kim up and carried her on his shoulder, which could have led multiple of his fingerprints to be left on the outer parts of Miss Kim's clothing. So the one positive result which came out, which was the DNA of Lee found on the outer rear end of Miss Kim's jeans, still was not sufficient evidence to include as assault into the charges. So the South Korean prosecutors initially placed their focus on convicting Lee guilty of attempted murder without the as assault charges included. This leads to our next point, which is whether Lee has indeed committed as assault to the victim during the missing 7 minutes. Now, to this day, Lee continues to claim that he did nothing quote-unquote inappropriate towards Miss Kim in the missing 7 minutes, saying that he merely tapped her on the face a couple of times during the time to check whether she was alive. When asked by the prosecutors on exactly why he took Miss Kim to an area of the apartment where there was no CCTV, he simply replied that he did it because he was quote-unquote scared. He actually has the audacity to act as if he's offended by being asked whether he has assaulted her, telling the prosecutors to quote, "Do you think I'm crazy? Do you really think that I has assaulted a woman who is bleeding? Do you know how crazy that would make me look?" End quote. And to that, we obviously have to tell him, yes, you are crazy. No person in the right mind would go up to a person that they saw for the first time and roundhouse kick them in the head and continue to assault them until they almost pass away. And his whole attitude during the entire prosecutorial investigation process is just absolutely unacceptable, to say the least. His entire attitude is literally not even a single bit focused on truthfully telling the prosecutors on what has happened on the day of the crime, but instead telling his part of the story purely on what will reduce the length of his sentencing. To elaborate, when asked by the prosecutors about events on the day of the crime where there is irrefutable evidence such as actual CCTV footage, he merely replies with either quote-unquote, "I was too drunk," or quote-unquote, "I cannot remember." This is as Lee is clearly a criminal who knows his way about talking to prosecutors in the direction of reducing the length of his sentence as much as possible. I mean, needless to say, he has been convicted already 18 times and has spent his entire life going in and out of prison. So this whole quote-unquote "I was too drunk" lies are his attempts to take advantage of South Korea's law of 심신미약, which can be loosely translated as in acting under a weak mind or acting unconsciously. This is as under South Korean law, the deliberate or indeliberate nature of the crime can have an important influence on the length of the sentencing in which the criminal receives. Hence, if one is completely drunk and is acting in a quote-unquote weak state of mind, this can help reduce the duration of the sentencing for the criminal. And with Lee more than well knowing the existence of this loophole in the South Korean justice system, continues to claim to the prosecutors, saying that he was quote-unquote drunk when he had to answer questions about events that could potentially incriminate him even further, and at the same time he could not refute and say that he did not do it due to definite CCTV evidence. But we do not have to be rocket scientists to acknowledge the fact that Lee was not heavily drunk on the day of the crime. Let us have a look at this CCTV footage. In the footage, you can see that Lee follows Miss Kim while she is walking back to her apartment. And during the 7 minutes in which Lee followed her, Miss Kim stops numerous times while walking in order to check her phone, etc. And every time Miss Kim stops walking, Lee also deliberately stops walking and is seen of lighting up a cigarette, etc. while maintaining a safe distance from her throughout the entire time. Now, Lee also claims that he followed Miss Kim because Miss Kim quote-unquote looked at him the wrong way and said something to him which got him to be apparently very angry. But then, if he was indeed this heavily drunk guy to the point of 심신미약, angry as can be guy that he claims to be he was, could he have been so meticulous in hiding from her sight and maintaining safe distance from her in the 7 minutes in which she followed her back to the apartment? Absolutely not. If he was indeed so drunk to the point of not being able to control his actions, while at the same time being in an extreme state of rage, in which he said he was during the time, the minute Miss Kim stops walking, Lee would have continued to walk towards her and conduct bodily harm right here and there. And some of his lies are just so unbelievable and out of this world that you begin to question just how such a being can even be regarded as another human being living on Earth. As in, he states to the prosecutors with a straight face that he did not know whether Miss Kim was either male or female. Like, really, this guy has the audacity to claim that he did not know that this figure was either male or female while following her for 7 minutes straight, as well as going up right behind her to do a roundhouse kick. And what kind of wobbly, heavily drunk man can conduct a taekwondo-style roundhouse kick to another individual with full accuracy and force? Kick so powerful that he almost fell from his own force, but then is immediately able to regain balance? None. But while he states that he was apparently too drunk at the time he kicked Miss Kim in the head and thus cannot remember the event, during the interrogation footage, he literally says that once he took Miss Kim to the no CCTV zone after the kick, he quote-unquote sobered up. Yes, he did literally say that he miraculously just sobered up in those few short seconds, and while he could not remember the kick, he could remember what happened only a few seconds afterwards when he took her to the no CCTV zone, which is that he merely just tapped Miss Kim on the face to check whether she was alive, and that he clearly remembers that he did not assault her in the 7 to 8 minutes of the time he spent with her in the no CCTV zone. So this whole "I was too drunk, I don't remember kicking her" nonsense are absolute lies by Lee, whose only focus during the entire interrogation process was not to participate in a truthful and repenting manner, but just spinning his tiny little brain to state the events of the day of the crime in a way that he thinks would minimize the length of his time in jail. If a statement is going to be disadvantageous to him if he speaks truthfully, but at the same time he cannot lie that he did not do it as there is actual CCTV evidence, then it's the quote-unquote "I was so drunk at the time and I was acting out of unconsciousness" or "I don't remember." But if he has to recall events of the day of the crime where there is no CCTV evidence, which means that he can safely lie without anybody being able to check upon it, then suddenly all the apparent quote-unquote drunkenness, hard to remember nonsense disappears, and he can now apparently remember everything and goes on to recall his fabricated lies in such an enthusiastic fashion. So in the footage of Lee's prosecutorial interrogation, when public through various media sources in South Korea, the people of South Korea rightfully became further and further infuriated with Lee. And adding on to his pathological lies, Lee never once asked whether the victim, Miss Kim, was recovering well or how he felt sorry to Miss Kim. Not even once. But what he did do was to ask the prosecutor on how many years he will get for this quote-unquote incident. To quote Lee's exact words, "How many years will I go to jail for this, Mr. Prosecutor? 2 to 3 years?" End quote. But not feeling sorry and not worrying about the recovery of the victim is not the only extent in which Lee has went. According to the words of his fellow inmate at the detention house leading up to the trial, Lee has repeatedly stated non-stop, day after day, of how when he gets out of jail, he will find Miss Kim and make her just, let's just say, not alive. According to his inmate, Lee keeps a notebook in the detention house where he has written down the current house address of Miss Kim and said that he will visit the address as soon as he gets a chance to get out of jail. And if his prison sentence was going to be a very long one, Lee said numerous times that he will find the opportunity to break out of prison through occasions such as when his parents pass away and he has to attend their funeral, or when he has to visit a hospital that is located outside of the prison facilities. Basically, do whatever it takes for him to seek vengeance on Miss Kim. So when the words of this got out, people in South Korea obviously grew more angry at Lee and began to worry about the safety and well-being of the victim, Miss Kim. This leads to our next reason as to why the South Koreans are currently so upset about this case. That is due to the large discontent in which the South Korean public has in regards to the protection in which the South Korean justice system provides for the criminals. To elaborate, when a suspect is accused of a crime in South Korea, their identity is initially protected under South Korean law. And if a private entity is to reveal the personal identity of the suspect without receiving consent from the South Korean court, then the private entity or individual who revealed the identity of the suspect can potentially be sued under the nation's defamation laws. Now, we can to some degree understand why the South Korean judicial system is so stubborn about protecting the identity of the suspect before a trial is conducted and a verdict is given. And that is partly due to the fact that the suspect may be proved to be innocent, the presumption of innocence that we all know of. South Korea has already had a number of cases, especially in the entertainment industry, where the celebrities have the status of quote-unquote public figures and thus oftentimes cannot enjoy the identity protection provided to ordinary citizens when accused of a crime. And in often cases, it turned out that the celebrity who was accused of a crime by the supposed victim turned out to be innocent, only to have it revealed after months of investigation and subsequent trial that the accuser provided lies either in order to seek financial gain from the defendant or for settling personal scores. Let us provide a few examples. In 2016, a South Korean male actor by the name of Jin-wook Lee was accused of assault. And until the accuser, Ms. Oh, confessed to the police that she fabricated false facts in order to have the actor Jin-wook Lee convicted, the actor Lee Jin-wook had to suffer from the ridicule of much of the South Korean public who believed the initial accusations to be true, having him to be stigmatized as a quote-unquote S-offender. In the same year, a South Korean poet by the name of Jin Sung Park was accused of S-harassment by 2 women. However, after almost a year length of investigation, the suspect poet Park was found to be innocent. And the 2 women who first accused Park were subsequently found guilty by the South Korean court on charges of false accusation. And while all of this was happening, the life and career of the poet Park was effectively ruined by the accusations. As his identity was revealed to the public right from the get-go when he was first accused, there were people reportedly demonstrating in front of his house, and all of his publication contracts were cancelled by the publication companies just based on the accusations alone. But then there was controversy in South Korea over the criminal punishment in which the 2 charged false accusers received. One did not even get prosecuted, as she claimed that she was in a state of 심신미약, or a conscious state of mind, when she made the false reports. The other false accuser received a fine of 300,000 South Korean won, which is just a mere sum of $230. A fine of $230 for effectively ruining the life and career of an individual. So as we can observe from the cases in South Korea, where public figures such as famous actors or poets had their identity revealed based on the accusations alone, while eventually being proven to be not guilty, if every single suspect in South Korea, including all of the non-public figure, ordinary citizens have their identity revealed from the get-go, starting from the day of when they're first accused, far before a trial is taking place, you can see what kind of negative consequences which this would bring to the lives of the people who have been falsely accused. But on the other hand, we also absolutely do not believe that the current stance in which the South Korean justice system takes on protecting the identity of all suspects is correct. To elaborate, we believe that when a criminal accusation has been made mostly based on the spoken statement of the accuser alone, without any physical evidence, then the identity and personal information of the suspect should be initially protected, as it is the case right now, until the suspect goes to court and receives the guilty verdict. However, what we do not agree upon is in regards to the dogmatic stance in which the South Korean justice system takes in protecting the identity of all suspects, with the very rare exception of the most heinous criminal offenders, such as murderers. To elaborate, although the Roundhouse Kicker Lee is technically a quote-unquote suspect, until a formal verdict is given in trial by a judge, we all know beyond any reasonable doubt that he has indeed committed the crime and is absolutely a criminal. This is as there is quite literally an actual CCTV footage of the criminal Lee conducting a roundhouse kick from behind the head of innocent Miss Kim and continuing to assault her multiple more times. There is no more clear evidence of crime than this. And to add to that, Lee already had 18 criminal convictions at the time of the arrest, which is more the reason why a face reveal should be regarded as more than necessary for the sake of the safety of the South Korean citizens. And to add even more to that, Lee has repeatedly stated his intentions on seeking vengeance towards Miss Kim as soon as he gets a chance to be out of jail. And this is not just some emotion-only based, fantasy-like quote-unquote I'm going to take revenge type of bluff talk. Lee literally has went on to the extent of finding the current house address of Miss Kim, in which she has newly moved into, as well as her birth certificate number. Yes, her actual birth certificate number. So when all or even one of these 3 requirements are met by the suspect before a trial is held, which are clear irrefutable physical evidence that shows that the suspect has indeed committed the crime, which more than likely guarantees a guilty verdict in the coming future trial anyways, history of numerous past criminal record, which clearly supports the likelihood of the suspect committing a similar crime again, which poses danger to the ordinary civilians, and last but not least, clear lack of repent of the offender shown during the interrogation process, which in Lee's case even goes farther to the point of threatening the victim and saying that he will have Miss Kim quote-unquote unalive as soon as he gets out of prison. So when such conditions are met, the South Korean judicial system should be amended in a way that will allow the face and identity of the criminal to be more readily revealed to the public. And now that we know the specific reasons as to why so many South Koreans are more than enraged at the Busan Roundhouse Kick as assault attempted murder case, We also have to now ask whether justice has been served for Ms. Kim and that Lee got the level of criminal punishment that he deserves. And the answer to this question is unfortunately a no, it has not been. Let us briefly summarize the chronology of court proceedings that went ahead for Lee. On October 28, 2022, the Busan District Court found Lee guilty of attempted murder and sentenced him to 12 years in prison. But then Lee appealed against the sentencing given by the Busan District Court, stating that the length of the sentence was too long for what he has committed. The South Korean prosecution also appealed, stating that the length of the sentence given to Lee was too light. Then a week later, after the first trial, Ms. Kim uploaded a post at a South Korean community website, which then went viral, which then led various news media sources to begin to cover the case. And as more and more media attention was given to the case, more and more people began to question what truly happened, or what the criminal Lee has done to Ms. Kim during the 7 to 8 minutes at the no CCTV zone on the day of the crime. And evidences of the fact that assault could have been potentially committed onto Ms. Kim began to surface. It was found that around 2 weeks after the day of the crime, Ms. Kim began to notice that she was bleeding from her rectum. Her doctor who examined this states that if Ms. Kim was to have reported this on the day of the crime, there would have been a high possibility that assault charges would have been added on to the attempted murder charge. So as the reports of the bleeding from the rectum area was made almost a month after the day of the crime, it could not be counted as substantial evidence enough to bring the assault charges onto Lee. But then more and more people who were close with Lee or were acquaintances with Lee came up and discussed the abnormal fantasies in which Lee had. His ex-girlfriend came out and stated that Lee have always had a proclivity with quote-unquote that part of the body. A guy who worked together with Lee as a club bouncer said that Lee has always been a misogynist, describing the women who visited the clubs as quote-unquote 골뱅이, which is a highly derogatory South Korean term against women who have been drinking alcohol. And while Lee was working at the club, he reportedly told many of his co-workers of his quote-unquote tip for not being caught with assault, which was by doing so on the rectum due to the difficulty of doing DNA testing on the area. Other acquaintances of Lee came up and made similar statements to that of Lee's ex-co-worker, further solidifying the possibility that assault has indeed been committed by Lee during the missing 7 to 8 minutes. So on April 19, 2023, the South Korean court ordered additional DNA analysis of the clothing in which Ms. Kim wore on the day. Then sufficient amount of DNA of Lee was found in this additional DNA analysis process, which then led to the Busan prosecutor's office to change the charges of Lee from attempted murder to assault attempted murder, in which the South Korean court accepted. And in the second appeal trial held on June 12, 2023, Lee was sentenced to 20 years in prison, being found guilty of assault attempted murder. Now, this sentencing is far weaker than what the Busan prosecutor's office asked for, which was to put Lee in jail for 35 years. Ms. Kim showed her sadness and fear in regards to the short length of the sentencing received by Lee relative to the nature of the crime. Such fear is to be rightfully held by Ms. Kim, as Lee is still only 50-something when he gets out of prison. And with a person who now has 19 criminal convictions under his belt and has reportedly memorized the birth certificate number of Ms. Kim and is just counting on the day that he gets out of jail to get his revenge, we know that this is not just a bluff talk, but a very real possibility. Those 19 convictions are not just there for nothing. And what would have happened if Ms. Kim did not write the post on the popular South Korean community website, or if the community post did not go viral, and that the entire South Korean population did not have their eyes on this case? Then there may not have been much pressure on the South Korean court to grant the subsequent additional DNA analysis, and Lee may have been able to get away without being punished for the assault that he has committed. But then the question which many South Koreans have right now towards the justice system of South Korea is this: why do the innocent ordinary civilians of South Korea have to live in fear in society among repeated convicts, while the convicts, such as in the case of Lee, with already 18 prior convictions prior to this case, still have their face and identity protected? Should it not be the other way around, with the protection part being more focused on the victims rather than the criminals? Sure, when it comes to suspects with no prior criminal record and with no physical evidence of the crime other than the spoken words of the accuser, protect their face and identity at first until they are proven guilty in court. But when it comes to an evil criminal who already had a record of 18 criminal convictions and was yet again caught with another heinous crime with irrefutable evidence of the crime, such as CCTV footage of the crime being committed, why do the authorities in South Korea still do not reveal the face of the criminal and still go out of their way to protect his identity? Unless the justice system of South Korea can answer such questions asked by the majority of South Korean population right now, the people's lack of trust towards the system will continue to remain.